Hello there. I just wanted to make a video about the 1960s and my impressions of it. Um, I've been talking with somebody quite a bit about the 1960s just recently and uh, looking at things, reminiscing about things. Um, so I just wanted to add a bit more to this subject. I did touch on aspects of it in my video, The End of the Boomer Line, which I put the link in the description for. Um, uh, but there was a lot of things to the 1960s, and I was born at the end of the 50s, so the 60s were my childhood basically, and the 70s were my adolescence. Um, so the 60s had a very big impact on me and a big influence, and I experienced them quite directly, even though I was obviously just a child, you know. Uh, so it's certainly an important subject for me, but also it's a subject which has, for me, become even more important as I've seen the negative impact of the 60s as well. So I just wanted to say a few things about what I could see about what was really good about the 60s and what really um, went horribly wrong in a sense, because there are a number of things there. Uh, and I'd just like to try and delineate them. And it's something I've thought of over the years in different ways. But as far as I could see, the good thing about the 60s was the opening up of spirituality. That's as far as I can see. The opening up of spirituality and the opening up of creativity. That was the good side to the 60s. Um, uh, and of course, when I'm talking about the 60s, I'm really talking about uh, Europe and North America, basically, and probably South America as well. I'm not sure where else, Australia, various places, but um, how wide the impact of the 60s was, um, I can't honestly say. Though you'd be surprised, because it seemed to wash over a lot of things, culturally, further than you would think it would have gone. Uh, But what seemed to me to be really positive about the 60s and was what was really drawing it forwards was this sense of spirituality and creativity. Now, what for me was the thing which destroyed the 60s was, on the one hand, drugs, um, and certainly the destructive aspects of drugs. Um, Psychedelics are a little bit of a complicated subject, I think, because I think there's plenty to say that psychedelics have had positive applications, positive uses in the right environments, in the right setting, with the right cultural surroundings and things like that. Uh, but there was an awful lot that even there was a bit of a fake. It was a bit of a sort of like just a bunch of kids trying to pretend that they were shamans and stuff, um, which wasn't the case. But the psychedelics is a bit to I put to what slightly to one side. There's all sorts of things to it, which are potentially very positive, quite possibly by the sound of it. But there are a lot of provisos, a lot of qualifications to that. But drugs in general uh, was a pretty disastrous thing. It led nowhere good. And I have never had any experience on drugs which actually uh, said to me that anything I experienced was useful spiritually. So I just like to put that that in there, but I don't have experience with actual sort of like pure psychedelics or anything like that, so I can't talk about that at all. Um, but the drugs was one thing which destroyed the positive effects of the 1960s. Um, and the other thing which destroyed the positive effects of the 1960s was politics, as far as I'm concerned. And this is something which has persisted and become more insidiously destructive as time has gone by, I think. Um, People forget what a violent time the 1960s were, but it was a very violent time. And uh, it led to a lot of violence in different ways. And, you can have all sorts of views on that. But uh, it was actually a violent time. It wasn't just all peace and love and all this sort of stuff. I mean, wouldn't it be nice if it were? But it wasn't. Now, the politics, though, the politics that came out of it, which was most essentially Marxist and then postmodern Marxist, yeah, after the failure of the old left, after the discrediting of things like Stalinism and the discrediting of the Soviet Union, yeah, the left looked for other things. That was also part of the 60s and the run on from the 60s. And the politics of the 1960s has been truly poisonous in the way it's infiltrated things, I believe. And it's funny because if you look at it, those two things which destroyed the 60s, drugs and politics has infected the elites and infected the middle classes. And then drugs have largely affected the working classes the most negatively. Yeah. So it's kind of an odd thing. The two things which destroyed the 60s, yeah, the rulers took the politics, and the serfs got the drugs, basically, and that's what became of the 1960s in terms of the negative stuff. Now, the positive stuff is always there, and I think it has that again is something you can still access in a sense, and you can look at if you want to, yeah. And you can look for spirituality in various ways. So that's basically my view of the 1960s, though. Good and bad, beautiful and appalling, both those things, and that's how I see it. Spirituality and creativity on one side, drugs and politics on the other, and that's my view of it.